Hey, my name is Milan, and in this video we are going to explore Augment Code. Most AI coding tools look great in a demo, but what happens when you drop them into a real .NET project with a few thousand lines of code? In today's video we're going to put Augment Code to the test and we'll see how far it can really go. In case you have never heard about it, Augment Code is an AI software development platform, and it specializes in large production-grade code bases with its context engine. I'm going to talk more about it as we go on through this video, but I do want to mention that this video is sponsored by Augment Code. However, everything I share with you as part of this video is going to be my opinion and how I feel about the tool. With that being said, let's talk about how you can get started with Augment Code. It works as an extension for most popular coding providers. I'll be using it inside of VS Code, and it offers a similar experience to what you might have seen with Copilot or Cursor, where you have a panel where you can interact with Augment Code, and you can use it in agent mode, you can use it as a chat window, or you can do inline edits inside of your source files. Now, what about the pricing? So there is a free plan that comes with a limited number of messages that you can use per month. It's up to 50 user messages. However, the one downside I see with this is that you are agreeing to allow AI training on your data. In any of their paid plans, there is no AI training allowed, and this is a big part of their effort to maximize security, and the security aspect is why I think it's worth considering Augment Code for large enterprise code bases. The first paid plan starts at $50 per month, and this is fairly affordable, in my opinion at least, considering what you get in return. So the one thing I want to highlight is the context engine. From my experience using Augment Code, it really shines in understanding your code base, no matter how large it is. And you can get really fast and snappy feedback whenever you ask it any question about the code base. You're going to see this as soon as we jump into the practical demo. So let's move over into VS Code and see what Augment Code can do for us. The code base I'll be using for this demo is called Evently. It's an event management platform and is built as a modular monolith using .NET 8. It's a decently large code base with more than 6,000 lines of code, and we're going to see how Augment Code fares with this type of code base. Now, how do you get started with Augment Code? Well, it's available as an extension. So if you go to extensions in your VS Code instance and you search the extension marketplace for Augment, you're going to see the Augment Code extension show up as the top choice. From here, you can install Augment Code, authenticate with your user account, and then you can start using it inside of your codebase. Since I already installed it, it's going to show up as another option in my sidebar, and the first thing I can do with my codebase is kick off the indexing process. This is what allows Augment Code to generate the context engine that we can use to generate new code that's perfectly tailored to what we have in our existing codebase. So I'm going to click on Index Codebase, and this is going to kick off the indexing process, and depending on the size of your code base, this may take some time. You can see it already completed, and we're getting a message that Augment just finished syncing with your code base. And one of the first things that you can do is try to get a summary of some component inside of this code base. I want to focus on the ticketing module inside of this application because it contains the most interesting use cases. So let's say I'm new to this code base. I can ask Augment to review the ticketing module without actually telling it where to find this module. It's going to figure this out on its own and give me a high-level explanation of what I can find inside. And this saves me the time of having to go through the code manually. I'll get a nice report that I can examine and then figure out what to do next. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, so let me show you how we can do this. So how you interact with Augment Code is through the chat panel here, where I can ask it to do something for me. So I'm going to say, can you focus your exploration on the ticketing module? I'm going to add more context by saying it's the most important module in this system, and I want to make sure that I understand it before we can proceed with adding more functionality to this module. So now I can send this message to Augment Code, and it's going to scan my code base, find the respective module, and then review the contents inside. So a couple of other things I want to mention. You can switch between agent mode and chat mode. The agent mode is perfect for making large edits to your code base, where it's going to update or create any missing files. Chat mode is a bit more of a controlled environment where you can decide which pieces of the code you want to accept. Now, I personally see the most value from using any AI coding tool in agent mode, so that's how I'm going to use Augment Code. Now, I do want to mention that they do have a remote agent where you can kick off an agent that's going to run in the cloud and work on your code base asynchronously. Now, imagine the power of kicking off multiple remote agents working on your code base where they can do PR reviews, adding more tests to your solution, or refactoring existing code. So the possibilities here are very cool. Now, let's go back to our agent. Another thing I can do is check auto, and this is going to allow Augment Code to automatically run commands on my system. Now, I'm not feeling that confident just yet, so I'm going to leave this turned off. And then you have some other options here for adding additional context, where you can attach some files or mention any files in your code base that you want added as additional context. So let's send this to the agent, and I'm going to close this down, and the agent is going to start thinking. And depending on the size of your code base, this may take a while, and you can see the process is kicking off. And what I really like about Augment is how it explains what it's doing inside of its thought process, let's call it that. So first, you can see it's looking for the files, classes, interfaces, and components in the ticketing module. And then after finding these files, it's going to start to extract some additional context from it. And as each step is progressing, you can see how we are getting messages from the Augment context engine. So it's going to explore the domain layer, the application layer, the presentation layer, where it's going to look for our API endpoints and see what we are exposing through our REST API. Then it figured out that I'm using integration events and domain events to asynchronously communicate between the various components in my system, and now it's exploring those. And then it might explore a couple of services that it thinks it's relevant. Now, after it's done this, it's going to produce an overview of the components in my system, and I think this is very valuable, so I'm going to expand it on the screen. So we're getting a mermaid diagram of the domain model inside of our system, and isn't this really awesome? With just one prompt, I'm able to get a high-level understanding of the components inside of my system. I can zoom into this diagram and see the entities that I have in my domain, like the ticket type, the event. And remember, this is an event management platform where events can be based on gatherings, stand-up shows, concerts, and similar. So then we have the order entity, the ticket, order items, payment information, card items, and of course there's the customer entity. Now going further, it's also going to create some diagrams for my business flow. So now I can examine these and figure out what are the use cases inside of my system. So you can see that within this module, a customer can browse events, add some tickets to the cart, and then if the cart has an item, we can create an order, process a payment, and after the order was created, we can issue tickets and generate the ticket codes. So this is really amazing, and I have to say I haven't seen other AI coding assistants be able to generate this level of context from just one prompt into your code base. You can see it figures out I'm using the clean architecture principles inside of my code base, and it correctly identifies the specific layers that I have defined inside of the module. Then it can give you the overview of the core domain entities, and you can easily navigate to the specific files inside of VS Code. So you can see I can go into the cart service, or let's say the ticket entity. Now moving on, it's also going to identify some important flows like the order processing flow. And if I go into the command handler, you'll note that these comments that you can see here aren't really part of my code base. It's something that Augment identified, and it added these comments here to make it easier for me to understand what's going on inside of the source file. And then I'm going to move a bit more forward. We'll get an overview of some of the events that are used within this module. And lastly, and I think this is really awesome, you get an overview of the API endpoints within your module. So now you can start understanding what is the functionality that's exposed through our REST API. So we can see endpoints for managing carts, endpoints for fetching or creating orders, and then endpoints for fetching ticket information. And then it also figures out that we are using permission-based authorization, and it lays out what are the specific permissions that we have defined within this module. And in the end, there's yet more context about this code base. So this is an amazing start if you're just opening up a new code base and you want to understand what are the key components inside the most important flows and use cases. And Augment Code definitely did not disappoint. So now let's say I want to generate a new use case. What you can see on the screen is a use case or a command handler for creating an order. And let's say I want to expose an endpoint where I can fetch an order summary. So one thing I suggest you do with Augment Code or with any other AI coding assistant is give it feedback when it's doing something right. So I'm going to say, thanks for extracting this context for me. It's very valuable. We want to start a positive reinforcement loop with the AI model. And speaking of which, what is the actual model or LLM that I'm using behind the scenes? Well, one design decision that's specific to Augment Code, and I have to say I like it, is you don't really have to think about which model to use. Augment Code is going to figure out on its own what is the most appropriate model to use, and is going to make the decision for you. And when you think about it, this does make sense. The providers of AI coding tools, Augment Code included, have more knowledge what is the best AI model to use for a specific code base. So why not let them make the decision for you and allow you to focus on what really matters? Now let's say I want to expose another query inside of my system that's going to allow me to return an order summary. I'm going to drop in the prompt that I want to use, and I'm going to say I want to introduce a new feature, a query for fetching the order summary. The response should include order information, event information, and the number of tickets purchased as a flat object without nested types. So I'm giving it some sort of constraint as to how I want it to generate my model. I also want to use classes for response types instead of records. And then I'm giving it a bit more context to guide it into the direction I want it to go in, and that is create a respective feature folder, the query and handler. Also expose an API endpoint that returns this query. So the more context you can give inside of your prompts, the better results you can expect to see. So let's send this to the agent, and it's going to start thinking and generating the response. And again, you're going to see how it's going to take a step-by-step approach in generating this query. So what it's going to do is check out if we have any existing queries inside of our system. So it's going to use those as a baseline for how you might want to implement a next query. Then it's going to explore the database schema. This is important because for the queries within this system, I'm using raw SQL with Dapper to retrieve the data from my database. And then it's going to figure out, okay, these are the files that I want to generate, and then it's going to start producing these files. So as it's making changes to these files, you can view them in the diff here. So I can take a look at each individual file. Here is our get order summary query, and the previous diff is red because this file doesn't exist. So what we're going to see inside is just a query. It's implementing iQuery, defining the response type, and the only argument is an order identifier. Then we can see the order summary response, and you can see it respected my decision to use a class, and it's using properties to represent the data that I want to return. Also, I don't see any complex types, so it's returning a flat structure exactly as I wanted it to. Then we have our query handler, and it's correctly figured out that it should use the IDB connection factory to open up a new database connection. Then it's defining my SQL query as a constant string, which is what I really like. And it's also using the name of operator in C# to extract the property name and use it as the value that we are returning from our SQL query. This is going to make mapping the response of the query into our object much easier. Now, mind you, this isn't a simple query. We're selecting from the orders table in the ticketing schema, doing a join on the order items, doing a join on the ticket types, and doing a join on the events. So just this one query is touching 4 tables, and Augment Code is able to figure out how to piece this together and give us back the results that we want. So finally, it's going to execute this query and return an order summary result. And it also correctly figured out that I'm using the result pattern in this code base. So it's going to return a failure result with a specific domain error in case the order summary is null. Otherwise, it knows that it can just return an order summary object. And lastly, it's exposing an API endpoint, which is going to send the query and process the result, returning the respective API response. And it's also setting the correct permission that is required to be able to execute this endpoint. So finally, and you can see this below, it's going to try to build my project. And this is a very important validation step. So after making the updates into your code base, it's going to actually build the project. And in case the build fails, it's going to figure out what went wrong and make any appropriate fixes based on that. So you can see right here that it's building the application project. This was where we created our use case. And now it's going to try to build the presentation project where we added the API endpoint. And if all of those succeed, then you should probably wrap up this session. And then we can decide to either keep the changes if we are satisfied with them, or discard them and possibly start over. Now, I'm definitely very happy with the changes it's made in my code. You can also navigate to the specific file within the file system by using the open file command, and you can take a closer look at the code that was generated. I'm going to stop the agent here because I'm confident the changes it made are correct. Now, if I want to validate this, I can always build the project myself using the CLI, and if I run into any problems, I can hand it off to the agent to figure out. So let's say I want to build this using .NET Build. It's going to find my solution, the project inside, and you can see the build was successful, including the changes made by Augment Code. So I'm going to keep all of the changes, and then we can continue adding more functionality to our system. Now, it's a good thing to keep in mind that you don't want to allow your chats with the agent to become too long. So try to create a new chat every now and then to have a fresh context. So I'm going to navigate to the ticket entity inside of my domain, and I want to use this as the context for my next use case, and this is going to be a command for archiving a ticket. Now, I already have a respective method in my domain that it should call, but I'm not going to give it any more context than just including the ticket entity. I'm going to drop in the prompt that I want to use, and I'm going to say amazing work. So again, we're giving positive feedback if we are happy with the results. And I'm going to say now I want to implement a different use case, archiving a ticket. This action should be protected with a custom permission that will apply on the endpoint. So I'm adding more context, but I didn't actually say which permission to use and if such a permission even exists. I want the model to figure this out on its own, and I'm also going to add one more piece of advice: create a task list to have a step-by-step approach. And the idea with this last bit of context is to force the agent to use the task window, where it's going to generate the individual tasks that are required to fulfill the overall request. Now, what you can also do is add a new task yourself to supplement what the agent creates on its own. So let's send this command to the agent, and it's going to start thinking now whether or not it creates the list of tasks we're going to see, but for now, it's looking at the ticket entity structure. It's also looking at any domain events, and it's also exploring the code base to see if we have any commands or event handlers that are related to this entity. So you can see it's slowly exploring my code base, looking at the individual files, the permissions, any use cases or application endpoints. So then you can see it's going to populate a list of tasks that it thinks are required to achieve the functionality that I need. So it created 8 tasks in total, and it's actually grouping the tasks under a higher level task. So now it can start working on these steps one by one. Before it kicks off the implementation, it's going to allow us to check the task list and figure out if we want to add or remove something. You can also add more information for each task. So in the task itself, I can actually see what it wants to do. For the add archive ticket permission tasks, it wants to create this permission, and let's say I agree with this. Then it's going to create a command, a respective handler, a validator. It's going to expose an API endpoint. It's going to add error handling, or let's say a ticket hasn't been found, and then it's proposing to write the unit tests and integration tests. I'm going to omit the last 2 steps because I'm going to be writing the tests myself. So I'm going to say I'm happy with the list of tasks. Please proceed with the implementation. So now it's going to continue where it left off and start implementing the tasks one by one. And what's awesome here is you're going to see the task is going to be completed as soon as the respective change has been made. You can switch to the diff view to observe any changes that are made in the meantime. So right now it's adding the archive ticket permission, and you can see it updated the permission file. If I go to the diff view, I can open the diff and see what are the changes that have been made. So you can see there's now a new permission here called archive ticket, and it's following the naming convention that we've already put in place. Then it's going to create an archive ticket command, and it only needs a ticket ID to process this command. So now it's figuring out that it wants to use the iTicket repository to fetch the ticket entity, but it's also figuring out that there isn't a getById async method on the ticket repository right now. So it's going to update my interface to expose such a method, and it's also going to update the implementation to properly return this entity. If we go into the ticket repository, we can see it's correctly implementing the getById async method, then it's going to build our command handler, and note that it's now using the new method it created on the repository. It's also returning a failure result if the ticket is null, and it's correctly using our domain method on the entity to archive the ticket. Finally, it's processing everything using the unit of work and returning a success result. Now there's also a validator to check the structure of our command. In this case, it's just checking that the ticket ID isn't empty, and in the meantime, it was updating the task list as it was completing each individual step. So now it's working on adding the archive ticket endpoint, and we can see the endpoint here. It chose to use the patch HTTP method for this endpoint, and it makes sense because it's only making a partial update to the ticket resource from a RESTful API perspective. It's correctly going to create a command, send it. It's also using the new permission that we created in one of the initial tasks, and after it's done this, it's going to update my task list and proceed to the last task, which is about adding error handling to our codebase. Now, there's already most of this implemented, so I expect it to just review the existing changes and decide that everything checks out. So you can see here that the domain logic already handles the case that we was looking at, so this is looking good. And now it decided it's going to create a new error, so it's going to update the ticket errors class, and it's adding an error that a ticket has already been archived. Now notice this, it's using a conflict error, and I think this is absolutely amazing. So it's able to figure out that the update we are trying to make is a conflict with the current state of our system. That is, we can't make a ticket archived if it's already been archived. So it's going to use this error and expose it inside of my command handler. So if the ticket is null, it's going to return a not found error. Otherwise, it's going to return an already archived error. Now you can see that even though I removed the specific task to generate the test cases, it still continued to do so, and it's creating some validator tests for my archive ticket command validator, and there's also some unit tests for the archive ticket command handler. So I don't really want to keep these changes, and I'm going to stop the agent now, and let's get rid of these two files. I want to create the tests myself, but everything else is perfectly valid, and I'm going to keep the changes. Now, just to make sure that everything is still working correctly, let's do a quick .NET build on our solution, and you can see that the build succeeded. And if you also want to make sure that we didn't introduce any regressions, the codebase already contains a few hundred tests that you can run to make sure that everything is working correctly. So let's say I want to run the integration tests for the ticketing module. I can kick off this process, and behind the scenes, this is using Testcontainers to start any external services that I need inside of Docker, and then it's going to use these containers to connect to the database or any other external service I might need. So you can see all of the tests are still passing, so we didn't introduce any regressions into our codebase. So let's go back to Augment. I'm going to kick off a new agent, and what I want to do now is create some integration tests for the archive ticket command handler. But before we do that, I want to make a couple of more remarks into how Augment Code works. Now, notice in the context window here, there's something called Augment Memories. If you open this up, you can see that Augment Code is going to store some information about the system that it thinks are relevant. And of course, you can update this if you want to add more context. For now, it's identified that the ticketing module is the most important one in this system, and we want to focus on this before adding new functionality. This was related to one of our first prompts where we were exploring the context of this system, and then it has a code style remark here that user prefers using classes instead of records. So this is definitely useful in terms of how you can guide Augment Code to make the correct decision. Another thing you can make is go into settings, and here you have option for adding rules and user guidelines. You can create a rule file if you want to use that approach, or you can define some user guidelines that are going to be applied globally when we are interacting with Augment Chat or Augment Agent. Another thing you can do is always go back to any of your previous threads. So we can see the previous thread where we were generating the archive ticket command, and I want to make a quick comparison of Augment Code to some other AI coding assistants like Copilot or Cursor. So what I've noticed is Augment Code is a bit slower when generating responses compared to the other two. However, it's definitely more methodical. It takes more time thinking about your code base, and the end results are consistently better compared to what I've seen with Copilot or Cursor. The latter two definitely tend to make some changes that I never really asked for, and so far I've personally been very satisfied with how Augment Code is keeping the changes scoped to exactly what I asked it for. It's going to make the changes that are necessary, and pretty much it's not going to add any additional lines of code that we don't really need. Another thing that annoys me a little is how it's not opening the files that the agent is changing as they are being made. With Augment, I have to look at the changes in the dev view and then explore each file individually. Now, this is more of a nitpick than a real drawback, but it's something that I've gotten used to from other AI coding tools, and I would really love to see this implemented in Augment Code. Now let's go back to our new agent and finally generate some test cases. So what I want to do is keep the archive ticket command handler in the context, and I'm going to say excellent work so far in creating the archive ticket command. Now I want you to generate some integration tests for this use case. And I want to give it a couple of test cases that I think are most relevant. And the test cases are going to be a test case when the ticket doesn't exist. I would expect it to identify this and return a not found error. Then I want a test case when the ticket exists and it's not archived, and a test case when the ticket exists and it's already archived. Now, I'm not going to tell it how to actually populate the seed data. I want it to figure this out on its own. And I'm also not going to tell it how to write the integration test. I want it to look at my code base and see if it can find any existing integration tests and then use those as a baseline for implementing the new integration test that I want it to generate. So it's going to do exactly that. It's going to look for integration tests within the ticketing module, and after a couple of moments, you can see it scaffolded the archive ticket tests. It contains the 3 test cases that I asked for. In the first test case, we are sending an archive ticket command. Behind the scenes, this is going to use real infrastructure running in a Docker container, and then we can evaluate the test result. The other 2 test cases are very similar. The first one here checks that we should successfully archive a ticket if it hasn't already been archived, and note that it's also asserting the state in the database by fetching the ticket using the DB context. And then in the last test case, it's first archiving the ticket and then trying to archive the ticket again, all as part of the arrange step. Finally, the end result should be getting an already archived error. So then it's going to try to execute the test itself, but I'm going to skip this step and I want to run these test cases myself. So you can see them here. I'm going to kick off the archive ticket tests, and then we can observe if the test cases are working or not. And after a couple of seconds, you can see that all of our new test cases are succeeding. So not only have we implemented a complete use case, touching like 5 or 6 source code files inside of our code base, the build was successful right away, and we also have 3 strong integration tests that are validating our new behavior. And all of this was generated by Augment Code with a couple of prompts guiding it in the right direction. Now, if you want to get started with Augment Code, I highly recommend installing the Augment Code extension, and you can get access to a free trial for 2 weeks where you can test out their developer plan. My experience so far has definitely been a big positive. A few things that I think Augment Code is doing right that other AI coding tools aren't doing on the same level. Definitely, their context engine makes a huge difference in how it feels to interact with the agent. It's like it truly has a deep understanding of your code base and how you are writing code. It's respecting any coding conventions that you might want to use. It's also great that it decided to respect the result pattern that I'm using inside of this code base instead of throwing some exceptions or not even implementing some validations in the first place. Another thing I like is the methodical approach that the agent takes. It explains what it's doing in each step, it adds more context, and this really gives you a great perspective of what the agent is thinking, where you can stop it and correct the course it's taking if you figure out that it's steered off in the wrong direction. This does happen from time to time, but even a little nudge makes a huge difference, where it can figure out where it went wrong in its reasoning and course correct and produce the correct output in the end. If you want to learn more about Augment Code, go ahead and click the link that's going to be in the pinned comment right below and in the video description. It's going to take you to their website where you can create your Augment Code account and get started with using this very powerful AI-powered coding assistant. Thanks a lot for watching this video. Make sure to smash the like button right below, and until next time, stay awesome.